Hi Paul, welcome to Open Mic.
Thank you, Michael.
You're just 46 years of age and you've already flagged your intention to walk away from the Swans at the end of the year. Why?
Well, I guess it probably goes back to when I first took it on. I really felt at the time, probably not so much when Rocket retired midway through the season, but I really felt, at the end of 2002, I was the right person to coach the club. It was never a burning ambition to be a long-time senior coach, but I really wanted to coach the Sydney Football Club because I knew the players well, and I felt that we could do something special there. But equally at that time, I didn't think I'd be around for 4, 5, 6 years. I wasn't really sure how it was going to work out. And then I just felt the timing was right to sort of step away at the end of 2010.
To do what?
I'm really not sure. I think the main thing was to determine, that coaching was behind me. So the first thing was, there was no point in worrying about what I was going to do. The first decision needed to be made as a family. Is it time to move on from coaching? And having discussed it with my wife and my kids, and I felt in my heart that it's really time for the footy club to move in a different direction, and they chose to appoint John Longmire, which I think is a good appointment. But really it was not about what I'm going to do, but more, that the time's right to walk away from it.
Have you ever wondered what might have been had the Swan supporters not risen up in 2003 and thwarted the club's attempt to install Terry Wallace as coach?
No, not really. I mean, it seems a long time ago, and I think I'm always the sort of person that sort of moves on, reasonably quickly. And I've spoken to Richard about it, and he's adamant that nothing untoward happened. And I believe that the people and Andrew Island and I have got great friendship, and Richard and I are great friends. So it's really not something I ever dwell on and look back on. At the time, I was coaching the team, and the seconds were in the finals, and it all sort of a bit of a blur, but I think it was a good time for the footy club in hindsight, because they'd never, being in Sydney, people said that the Sydney people didn't really have the passion, and I think the club was happy in the end, and Richard was happy in the end that the fans showed a real commitment to something, and it obviously kept on rolling on over the next sort of 6 or 7 years.
You've had a lot of success. The club's first premiership in 72 years, a 57% strike rate, finals in 6 of your 7 full seasons. What to you is the greatest of those achievements?
Well, I mean, premierships, because I hadn't won one as a player, and played for 17 years. It was a long time to play. Played in '96 and lost, and it was so disappointing. So exciting to be there, because I didn't think I'd ever be there when I arrived in Sydney in '95. I really went to Sydney because I thought it was the right move for myself, but I didn't really expect to play in finals, let alone play in the grand final. So that was great. So I don't think you can ever top a grand final. That's just a fantastic achievement by the footy club, and given the fact that it was 72 years, that's got to be the pinnacle of the 8 years.
We don't see you excited all that often, certainly not in public. It must have been a magic moment when the siren sounded in 2005.
Yeah, I think you go into a grand final, and not that I've ever spoken to any other grand final coaches about it, but I think you go in and you've almost rehearsed your victory speech, and you've rehearsed your speech in terms of losing as well. So, but I hadn't sort of rehearsed that part of it, I guess. But I think at that moment, thinking about how much had gone into it, and the fact, I think I really took my time getting from the coach's box to the field, and other coaches probably didn't, but I really wanted to embrace the whole moment. So in the coach's box, I stayed for probably, 30 seconds to a minute after the siren finished, and then walked down to the ground and saw people, obviously my family, but people like Paul Kelly and Bobby Skilton and Barry Round, and even a lot of the guys that had put a hell of a lot of money in during those early years, and that really made me realise how big an effort it was, not just for the players on that day and the coaching staff, but the football club as a whole.
The people have waited 72 years to see South Melbourne / Sydney Swans win the premiership. Here it is!
You won a flag and lost a flag with a kick on both occasions. Were you lucky or unlucky? You could have won 2, you could have lost 2. How do you...
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would have loved to have won 2, and I would have hated to lose 2. So I guess in the course of the history and the closeness of the games between the Eagles and Sydney, and if you look back now, as I said, I'd love to have won 2, but if you look back and I think both Wisher and I might, in 10 years' time, agree on one thing, that 1 and 1's probably not a bad result. I mean, I'm sure he would have loved to win 2, but probably a part of him says, gee, it would have been disappointing for the Swans. And I think if we had a 1-2, I would have had a bit of a feeling for Woosha and the Eagles, because there was so many close games. So a 1-1 result over that period of time, and it wasn't just the finals, it was some great games during. I think it was a fair result for both football clubs.
2009 was a testing year on and off the field. 12th position, 8 wins. How do you see the future of the footy club?
Look, I think we addressed it in the off-season as well, and I think towards the end of last season, putting players in certain positions, some were forced, obviously, with Hawley going. Jesse White getting an opportunity to play in that position. Then we moved Adam Goods to centre-half forward. We played some young guys. I mean, we've played some young guys over the last couple of years. It is harder to play young players when you're playing finals, because you're just more successful, so it is harder for players to get in. But I think we have played a fair few young players over the course of the last couple of years, and certainly towards the end of last year I thought we were playing some really good football. We went 1 point against St Kilda, 4 points against Geelong, and they were clearly the benchmark teams. So I think the club's got some real confidence going into the next sort of 2 or 3 years.
Andrew Demetriou famously criticised your game style in the premiership year. You were angry about that, weren't you?
I thought it was probably unnecessary, but at the time, when you're in the midst of the season, you're playing and all those sorts of things, there's a lot of other things you worry about. I mean, the things you can control, really. There's not too many. The things that, one thing I've learned over the years of coach, there's so many things you've got to do, and if you waste a lot of time on things that are out of your control, it takes your focus off the things that you can control. So, when I look back on it, I think it was unnecessary, but it happened. We've both moved on now, and we won the premiership. So,
You did boycott his visit to the footy club shortly after the premiership, didn't you?
I was supposed to be the guest, and I just felt it was inappropriate for me to turn up at that particular stage. Given the comments, and once that all got sorted out, then it was fine.
You arrived in Sydney at the end of 1994 with a chap named Tony Lockett. Club had just won the Wooden Spoon. What were your expectations? Did you think you were just playing out time, or did you actually see a future there?
I saw a future, in a sense. Ronnie Joseph was responsible for me getting up there. He was terrific. Barras was coach. Richard Collis, who's still there, obviously. But I did see a future. I think that was the big thing that probably sold me at the time. Certainly Plugger going, I think, was huge. And I also had a lot of respect for some of the players that I'd seen play on television and played against. Paul Kelly, Andrew Dunkley, Mark Bays, Darren Creswell. So I felt they had the nucleus of a reasonable team. I didn't know whether we'd play finals. I originally signed for 3 years, 96, 97, 98. I ended up playing another year, but I didn't know whether we played finals. But to be able to play with particularly Plugger and Paul Kelly was an absolute privilege.
Tell us your memories of Fitzroy.
Oh, yeah, look, really fond memories going back, and it's amazing the bond that exists between that group of players, Not that we spent a lot of time together, but it's amazing when a Mickey Conlon picks up the phone and rings you. You could talk for hours. We just have a really special bond. Matty Rendell obviously works at Adelaide and have a bit to do with him. Scotty Clayton, Johnny Blake is an assistant coach of mine. Now Lynchy, was fortunate enough just to go skiing in Aspen with him. So there's a really good bond between those players, and they're great memories. Not the last sort of couple of years, but certainly, and I was fortunate to play with Bernie Quinlan and Gary Wilson, and in the history of footy, I think those teams didn't win premierships, and probably guys like Gary Wilson didn't get enough credit for how good of players they were. Bernie did because I think of his Brownlow, but even Bernie was, he's as good a player that I've ever seen play. He was an absolute star, and so was Gary Wilson. And probably the disappointing thing from that era was that some of those guys in the history of footy haven't got the due recognition. How
difficult was it to actually walk away from Fitzroy when we knew the club was in its death throes?
It was really hard, but in a sense, because I felt it was crumbling so badly, it was probably, I knew it was the right thing to do. It was hard because I really felt for the supporters. Great group of supporters, and when you see supporters putting their hand in their pocket over and over and over and over again, and that's what tended to happen at Fitzroy, you've got nothing but love for those people, because you're fully aware that they've funded the club. 86 when we were going to go to Brisbane, so you're talking about a period of 1986 all the way through to when I left in 95. I knew that people were tipping money in all the time to keep the club afloat. But I just sensed the club. The biggest thing for me was the club was was not the club I joined, and that was the biggest thing that I found at that particular time, and that's what made it a little bit easier to walk away. Not from the supporters, but from the club itself wasn't the same footy club.
Were you committed to the move to Brisbane in '86?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Because the way it was put to us, I think it was Leon Wiegard at the time, was that I think there was three options: we merge, we fold, or we go to Brisbane. So, I think it was on the tennis courts at Wesley College, and I think pretty much unanimously we all said, well, we don't want to fold, we'd prefer not to merge, and if we all agree to go, let's go as a group, and I was very supportive of that.
It's fact or fiction, this one. You nearly followed your old mate Gary Pert to Collingwood before you went to Sydney, didn't you?
Well, before Purdy went, I got a phone call when I was in America at the end of '90. Collingwood had just won the finals, and I got a phone call, not from anyone at Fitzroy, from a manager, and he said, Fitzroy want you to take a 30% pay cut, or they'll trade you to the club of your choice. And Collingwood have already done a deal with Fitzroy, and I've already sat down and worked out contracts. I said, well, if that's the case, and then a couple of people from Collingwood rang me. I flew back to actually to sign with Collingwood. I still hadn't heard from anyone from Fitzroy at all, and they didn't trade me in the end because I don't think they could get anyone from Collingwood to go to Fitzroy. And I rang them after the trade period and went in and spoke to them and said, oh no, look, everything's okay, we're going to pay you now, and and I resigned from the captaincy as a result of that, and ended up re-signing at the end of the following year.
So when you got on the plane in the States to come home, you thought you were coming home to be a Collingwood player?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you regret that it never happened?
Not necessarily, because I think when Dyson Holase I think took over, and I think you still enjoyed 2 or 3 years with Lynchy, and I thought he developed into a terrific player, and Rossi Lyon and I are really good mates, and Jimmy Wynn. So there's some really good guys still at Fitzroy. I was really disappointed when I first got the phone call. I wanted to stay at Fitzroy, and I was desperate to stay at Fitzroy, but I was pretty dirty when no one from Fitzroy had contacted me, and I actually had to ring them to find out after the trade period what had happened. But I was pleased I was able to stay at Fitzroy. Obviously Collingwood at the time, I would have been happy to go and play with them, but it didn't work out.
An opportunity. Abbott can't crash his way through. Roos' left foot kick. Unbelievable finish.
You were such a talented, adventurous player at Fitzroy, but as a coach, you're risk averse, defensive first. Why the contrast?
No, I'm a student of sport, I think. Played a lot of basketball as a kid growing up, and I'm a big fan of the NFL and the NBA and other sports. So I'm a student of sport, and I guess my philosophies come from what wins. I think coaches, there's a lot of talk down here, and in particular, obviously we live in Sydney, there's less talk about game styles and all those sorts of things. My only as far as I'm concerned, my only obligation to the board and to the fans is to win. And we implemented a game plan that we believe would win games of footy, and that's really where it stemmed from.
I understand your obligation to the board and to your footy club, but is there a responsibility for you coaches to concern yourself with the aesthetics of the game?
I don't believe so. Some coaches would say yes, no question, but I don't believe so, because I don't think there's ever been a coach been reappointed because the team looks pretty. And I say that in all seriousness. I think if you take that on as responsibility, then you're in danger of actually not doing the job that you're paid to do.
Let's get specific on that. You were in the coach's box in that infamous game at Telstra Dome, St Kilda and the Swans, 12 goals for the afternoon. At the end of that, is it only the result that matters, or do you reflect later and sort of say, we've served up a lot of...
Well, the best way to answer that is the grand finals. How many goals were kicked in the 2 grand finals? How many goals were kicked in 2005? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were quoted as saying it's one of the best grand finals you ever went to see. And I remember at the end, ironically at the end of 2005, during the period of time where we copped the most criticism, I think one of the websites did a poll of the 10 best games for the year, and the Swans were in 4 or 5 of those 10 best games. Have we played ugly footy? Absolutely. Absolutely. We've played some shocking games of football over 8 years of football. We've played some terrible games of football. But is that a result of the game style? No, it's not, because we've been successful, and we've played games with that same game style that have been fantastic. What sometimes people fail to see is there's an opposition as well. You know, you come watch us train. We're a bloody exciting team to train because if we're 18 versus 0, we'll bring the ball down the corridor every time, you know. So absolutely, we've played some terrible games of football, some games of football that I can completely understand where the fans would go, gee, why would I come back? But I don't think we're any different to any other team. You know, if you look at an 8-year period, there wouldn't be a team in that 8-year period that couldn't say that we haven't been involved in some really bad games of footy.
You look so composed in the box. Is that real, or are you a bit like the duck? I mean, is the feet are paddling at 100 miles an hour?
I think I'm naturally calm, but I mean, you can't be a coach and not be emotional. You know, I think that gets, you know, overplayed a little bit. You know, I mean, if you'd ask the players, I think generally over a period of time, they would say I'm calm. But have I given them sprays? Absolutely. You know, would the coaches in the box say at times that I've yelled and screamed? Absolutely. You know, it's an emotional game, but I think I'm naturally operate better as a coach when I'm calmer.
I recall you telling me once that you never reviewed the players as a group immediately after the game for fear of saying something that you might want to take back during the week. Is that still the case?
One of the things I wrote down before I started coaching was along those lines. I felt that certainly the coaches that I'd had, that was the least productive time of the week. You know, so I'm very, very careful to review the team after the game. You know, and if I don't think I've got something constructive to say, I won't say it. And sometimes the players have said, you know, why didn't you speak after the game? But it's amazing the number of times where, you know, I have or haven't, and I've gone to the video on the Monday and looked at it and either said, gee, why did I say that? Or I'm glad that I didn't say that, because one comment in the box from an assistant coach can take on a whole life of itself, you know, and then you tend to, you know, we've all seen, it doesn't matter what level of footy it is, the coach that starts talking and can't be quiet, you know, and then all of a sudden he goes around and picks off, you know, 10 players in the room. I've seen probably more relationships broken over my 17 years as a player in that period of time than any other period of the week.
Does meditation play a part in your coaching, or is that something reserved for the family and your private life?
I think both. I mean, meditation sometimes gets misconstrued as some spiritual thing where you go and, you know, sit in a cave for 4 hours a day, and I mean, you can do that, but really it's about focusing and clearing your mind and just getting your day off to a good start. And, you know, so that's the thing for me, is just trying to clear my mind, you know, be clear in what I'm doing at work, and whether it be the day of the game, when I always meditate the day of the game, just to try and make sure that, you know, I do clear my mind and get focused. So it's really a lifestyle thing, but it's certainly helped in my coaching. How
have you felt about seeing Barry Hall in opposition colours?
Look, I'm pleased that he's playing, and I'm pleased that he was able to take some real time to think about it. I think that was the big thing for Barry, you know, which was good. I think he really took that 8-week period to think about what he really wanted to do, and that was the only thing that we talked about, you know, in relation to whether he played again. Just do it for the right reasons, relax, enjoy yourself, have a think about it. So given the fact that I know that he's really, really thought about it, I'm really pleased that he's made the decision to play. Yeah, and I really genuinely hope he does well.
Premiership hero for Sydney and a co-captain on that day. Were you fair to him last year, given his contribution to the club over the previous 4 or 5 years?
Well, he made the decision himself.
It was his decision,
was it? Completely his decision. At some point, we would have had to make a decision. But I think the way Barry handled it took that decision out of the club's hand and took that decision ultimately out of my hands. So, you know, and anyone that saw the press conference, he was amazingly, brutally honest in terms of what he said. And I think, again, that period of time, given that we probably didn't rush it and, you know, and we just let it take its course, and he came to the decision himself. So in terms of the club, you know, I'm more than happy with the way the club handled it, and ultimately I think the way Barry handled it was just super professional, and that's why I'm really pleased that he's playing again.
Did you ever sympathise with the big fella in the way the ball came into his area, which seems so often lead, start another lead, and sort of clearly get frustrated with this sort of lack of direction?
Oh, I think there's a lot of things that frustrated Hawley. I mean, there's another area of the game that frustrated him more than the way we carried the ball.
They're the umpires.
I mean, clearly that was a frustration, and I, you know, it was a discussion I'd had endlessly with Jeff about Barry, you know. So I completely understand his frustrations, no question. I mean, I think, you know, what I'd say about Barry is we understand Barry more than than anyone else. You know, as a club, we love Barry Hall. As a club, we absolutely love him. We saw week to week what he went through, what he did for the club, and all those sorts of things. So you won't get a group of people that like Barry Hall any more than the Sydney players, the Sydney coaching staff, the Sydney fans, etc., etc. No matter what he does with the Bulldogs, and even if they win a premiership this year, yeah, there won't be a supporter base that loves him more than ours, and there won't be a football department that does.
Do you think, you mentioned Hawley, Hawley, throw Jonathan Brown in there, do the big full forwards, do they get victimised?
Oh, look, I mean, that's just, I suppose, in a sense, the history of the game, isn't it, really? You know, I played with Tony Lockett, you know, without going over every time they go to a marking contest and all those sorts of things. You know, Lynchy, good mates with Lynchy, and he's a big power forward, and, you know, as you talked about Barry Hall, you know, if you wanted to make a generalisation, I guess, and if we're just talking generally, if you and I are talking at the bar about football and we wanted to generalise, yeah, you'd probably say that there's that group of players has probably had a little bit harder than another group of players.
While we were on full forwards, Paul, you saw Plugger as an opponent and as a teammate. How good was he?
He's an exceptional player, and has done more for the game than any person. And that's probably, and I understand people's perspective when they say, well, why doesn't he do this and why doesn't he do that, and all those sorts of things. But whenever people talk to me about Plugger, in my opinion, if you balance the ledger, what did Tony Lockett get out of the game and what did Tony Lockett give to the game? He gave to the game far more than what he got out of it. And so when he doesn't turn up at a function or when people criticise him, I'm his greatest supporter, because he simply wants to be left alone. That he gave more to the game. If you talk about Sydney, there's no more influential figure in the game of football, in my opinion, than Tony Lockett.
It's going to go! He's got a remarkable player. Ensures the fact, for however long we play the game, he will be remembered forever.
You've played with an amazing array of champions at both Fitzroy and Sydney. Do you want to elevate one to the top position?
One is very hard. I mean, if I could pick two, I'd probably... There's four that stand out, but which is Tony Lockett and Paul Kelly at Sydney, and Gary Wilson and Bernie Quinlan at Fitzroy. But I'd probably Plugger, and, you know, I mean, he's kicked 1,300 and whatever goals. It was just an extraordinary performance. And Bernie Quinlan to win a Brownlow medal as a ruck rover and then to go forward and kick 100 goals, I think is an underestimated effort, you know, in the context of the history of footy.
Kevin Sheedy dubbed you the Sundance Kid. When he first said that, what did you think he meant?
I don't know. Kevin comes up with a lot of, you know, terms and that. I took it as a compliment. I don't know why, but because I didn't really know what it meant. But I took it as a term of endearment, I guess. So once I took it as that, I didn't really worry about what it meant. Maybe I took it in the wrong way. Maybe he was having a go at me. But because I took it in a good way, I didn't really even ever go and ask him what he meant or whatever. It didn't really worry me.
While we're on Sheeds, how do you think you'll go back in the coaching mix? He's got a big job in Western Sydney. You're a football lover primarily, but you're involved with the Sydney Football Club at the moment. Do you hope it works?
Oh, I hope so, because if it doesn't, I think the ramifications are catastrophic. And by that I mean I hope it works for them and Sydney, because if it doesn't work, it's going to have some significant ramifications for football. So what I'm saying to you is, if GWS, the 18 or whatever they're going to call it, works at the expense of Sydney, well, we're no further advanced. So both teams are going to have to work. If the Sydney Swans, you know, go down with the history they've now created in Sydney and don't get looked after, in a sense, then it could be very, very bad for the game.
Brett Kirk, can't jump, can't run, can't kick, yet he's the essence of your footy team. Tell us a bit about Kirky.
Look, he's a great example to, I think football's a great, it reflects life. And Brett Kirk's a great example of that. You know, if you talk to people, no matter what endeavour they do, or whether it's school kids, or we go and talk to the people at BHP or the Commonwealth Bank or whatever it might be, what do you talk about? You know, you talk about your maximising your potential, you know, working as hard as you possibly can, you know, getting the best out of yourself. And when you see, the other side to that is when you see guys that are so much more talented than Kirky that don't produce anywhere near, that's what makes you frustrating, because you do realise that athletically, Kirky's an elite runner, so he's got he's got one really good strength, in terms of his athleticism. So that's probably a little bit undersold, but I take your point. I mean, he's just fantastic. What he's been able to achieve is extraordinary, and it's a great lesson to our players. And I think that's why, we love him so much, because he's great for me as a coach to be able to use him as an example. I mean, we talked about some of the players before. Bernie Quinlan, he was a phenomenal athlete, a great player. Gary Wilson was a great athlete. Paul Kelly was a great athlete. So sometimes when you're using those guys as an example, people say, oh, gee, well, I'm not as good athlete as Bernie Quinlan, or I'm not as good athlete as Paul Kelly. But when you're using Brett Kirk as an example, it's hard for someone to say, well, I'm not faster than Brett Kirk, So he's a great player, great person, but also a great, ally to have for a senior coach.
If the fairy godmother called overnight and said you can have your pick of any player from the other 15 clubs, who would it be?
Gary Ablett Jr.
Paul, a pleasure to catch up with you as always. Good luck for the season and congratulations on what you've done so far.
Thanks, mate. Good on you. Cheers.